My name is Maxine, and I'm 36 years old. Standing here in front of the glass tower that was once our shared dream, I can still feel the burn of that morning 6 months ago, when my husband fired me in front of 200 employees. The company we built from nothing, the empire I coded line by line while he slept, became the stage for my public execution. But they don't know what's about to happen in that boardroom today. They don't know what I've prepared. Before I take you inside this corporate coup that changed everything, where are you watching from? Hit that like button if you believe karma finds its way to corner offices, and subscribe, because what happens in boardrooms doesn't always stay there. I met Marcus 12 years ago in the library at Harvard Business School. It was 2 a.m. during finals week, and he was the only other person crazy enough to be studying corporate finance at that ungodly hour. I was there working on my thesis about algorithmic trading patterns, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled papers. He walked over with 2 fresh coffees from the vending machine and said the words that would change my life forever. Those words weren't romantic or profound. He simply said he needed someone who understood both code and commerce to help him revolutionize financial technology. We spent the next 3 hours talking about his vision. Marcus had this infectious energy when he spoke about disrupting traditional banking systems. His eyes lit up, describing how we could democratize financial tools that only hedge funds had access to. I showed him my prototype algorithm that could predict market micro-movements with 87% accuracy. By sunrise, we had sketched out a business plan on napkins. By graduation, we were not only business partners, but engaged to be married. The early days were nothing like the Harvard success stories they sell you. Our first office was Marcus's garage in Palo Alto, which flooded every time it rained. I remember coding our primary platform while sitting on plastic crates because we couldn't afford chairs. Marcus would practice his pitches to me while I debugged code until 3 or 4 in the morning. We lived on instant ramen and dreamed, sleeping on an air mattress in a studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant. For 5 years, we were rejected by every major investor in Silicon Valley. They said our technology was too complex, our market too narrow, our team too small. Marcus started doubting, talking about taking corporate jobs, but I refused to let him give up. I worked 20-hour days perfecting our algorithm, making it faster, more accurate, more user-friendly. I turned down a $200,000 offer from Google to keep building our dream. That's what you do when you believe in something bigger than yourself. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday in year 5. A mid-sized bank in Chicago agreed to pilot our software for their trading desk. The contract was worth $500,000. But more importantly, it was validation. Within 6 months, their trading efficiency improved by 32%. Word spread through the financial industry like wildfire. Suddenly, the same investors who wouldn't return our calls were camping outside our garage office. We went from 2 people to 20 in 3 months, then 50, then 100. By year 7, we had 200 employees in offices in 3 cities. The IPO valued us at $50 million. The financial press called us the darling of fintech. Marcus became the face of young entrepreneurship, giving TED Talks and appearing on magazine covers. Behind every photo shoot and interview, I was there making sure our technology stayed ahead of competitors. Here's where I made my first mistake. When the board suggested official titles, Marcus wanted CEO, which made sense, since he handled all external relations. They offered me CTO, but Marcus convinced me to take a lesser role, head of product development, so it wouldn't look like nepotism. He promised me it was just optics, that we were always equal partners. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I trust the man who held my hand through my father's death, who surprised me with a honeymoon in Santorini, who still brought me coffee? Exactly how I liked it every morning. 7 months after the IPO, Marcus hired Jessica as our Chief Operating Officer. He didn't discuss it with me first, just announced it at the Monday leadership meeting. She walked in wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, her MBA from Wharton practically gleaming on her resume. 29 years old with experience at McKinsey and Goldman Sachs. The board loved her immediately. She spoke their language of optimization and scalability while I was still focused on product integrity and user experience. Jessica integrated herself into our company's ecosystem with surgical precision. Within her first month, she restructured 3 departments, implemented new efficiency metrics, and somehow convinced Marcus to give her a corner office larger than mine. She had this way of making every idea sound revolutionary, even when she was just repackaging standard corporate practices with fancy terminology. The late meeting started innocently enough. Marcus would text that he and Jessica needed to review quarterly projections. These sessions that should have taken an hour stretched to 3, then 4. When I'd stop by his office at 9 at night with dinner, they'd be huddled over laptops, their chairs pulled close together, Jessica's perfume hanging in the air like a warning I didn't want to acknowledge. The weekend business trips began 3 months after she arrived. Conferences in Vegas, investor meetings in New York, strategy sessions in Miami. Marcus had never needed company on these trips before, but suddenly Jessica's presence was essential. He'd call me from these trips, but the calls grew shorter, more distracted. I could hear her voice in the background, hear him laugh at her jokes in a way that made my stomach turn. I found the first message by accident on our shared iPad. Marcus had forgotten to log out of his personal email, and a notification popped up while I was reviewing product specs. It was from Jessica, sent at 1 in the morning. The subject line was innocent enough, discussing market analysis, but the message ended with her saying she couldn't stop thinking about their conversation at the hotel bar, how his vision excited her in ways she'd never experienced professionally. There was a winking emoji, just one tiny yellow face, but it shattered something inside me. Instead of confronting him immediately, I did what I'd been trained to do since childhood. I tried to fix myself. Maybe I'd become too focused on work, too comfortable in our relationship. I started getting up earlier to go to the gym, bought new clothes that weren't hoodies and jeans, suggested date nights like we used to have in college. Marcus barely noticed. When he did comment, it was to ask if I was feeling insecure about something. The company dynamics shifted gradually, then suddenly. In meetings, Marcus started interrupting me mid-sentence, something he'd never done in 12 years. When I presented new product features, he'd look to Jessica for validation before approving anything. She'd give these small, knowing smiles that made me feel like an outsider in the company I'd built from scratch. Employees started noticing. Some of the engineers who'd been with us since the garage days pulled me aside asking if everything was okay. Tom from the development team was the first to warn me explicitly. He'd overheard Jessica on a phone call discussing how to minimize my equity position during the next funding round. When I thanked him for telling me, he said 20 other employees wanted to speak up but were afraid of retaliation. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my marriage. It was about systematic dismantling of everything I'd contributed to our success. I started documenting everything. Every dismissed idea, every excluded meeting, every financial decision made without my input. That's when I discovered the discrepancies in Jessica's department budgets. $3 million allocated to strategic initiatives that didn't exist. Vendor contracts with companies that had no online presence. Payment authorizations with Marcus's digital signature for services never rendered. When I tried to schedule a meeting with Marcus to discuss these findings, his assistant informed me that all meetings now needed to go through Jessica for approval. My own husband required his mistress's permission to speak with me. I sat in my office that day, staring at our wedding photo on my desk, wondering when I'd become a ghost in my own life. The company whispers grew louder. People stopped talking when I walked by. Emails I was copied on decreased from hundreds daily to fewer than 10. Projects I'd initiated were reassigned without notice. Jessica started hosting leadership meetings in her office, and somehow my invitations got lost in the system. Marcus stopped coming home most nights, claiming the product launch demanded his constant presence. Though I knew our release schedule was 3 months away. I found receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, charges for jewelry, I'd never received hotel bookings in the city when he was supposedly at conferences. Each piece of evidence felt like another line of code in a program designed to delete me from existence. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was the gaslighting. When I mentioned feeling excluded, Marcus said I was being paranoid. When I questioned financial irregularities, he accused me of not understanding the bigger picture. When I asked about Jessica, he said I was being unprofessional and jealous. The night I decided to take action was surprisingly quiet. Marcus hadn't come home again, and I sat alone in our house surrounded by the blueprints of our original business plan. Those napkins from Harvard were framed on the wall, his handwriting mixed with mine, our dreams intertwined in pen and coffee stains. I realized then that I could either wait to be erased completely or start writing my own code for survival. The morning of my professional execution started like any other day. Marcus had actually come home the night before sleeping on his side of the bed like nothing had shifted between us. He even kissed my forehead when he left for his morning run, a gesture so normal it felt cruel. I dressed carefully that day, choosing the black dress I'd worn to our IPO celebration, though I didn't know yet it would become my funeral attire. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. These quarterly gatherings were meant to celebrate wins and align on strategy. 200 employees crowded into our largest conference room, with another 50 joining virtually from remote offices. I sat in my usual spot in the front row, notebook open, pen, ready to capture action items like I'd done for 7 years. Marcus stood at the podium with Jessica beside him, which should have been my first warning. She wore a red dress that seemed to announce her victory before the battle even began. Marcus cleared his throat and the room fell silent. He started with the usual corporate speak about market challenges and adaptation needs. Then his tone shifted, became more serious, more distant, like he was delivering news about someone he'd never met. He announced a restructuring of the technical division to align with new strategic priorities. The words flowed from his mouth with practiced precision, each phrase carefully crafted to sound reasonable, necessary, inevitable. Jessica nodded along her face, a mask of professional concern. Then he said my name, not with the warmth of a husband or the respect of a business partner, but with the cold efficiency of an executioner. My position was being eliminated, effective immediately. The company needed fresh perspectives in product development. My contributions were appreciated, but it was time for new leadership to take us into the future. The room gasped collectively. I heard someone drop their coffee cup, the ceramic shattering against the floor. 20 pairs of eyes from my original team stared in horror. Marcus continued speaking, but his words became white noise against the roaring in my ears. Jessica stepped forward to announce she would be assuming oversight of all technical operations while they searched for a replacement. The woman who couldn't write a line of code would be managing the engineers who'd built our entire platform. She thanked me for my service, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, said they wished me well in my future endeavors. Future endeavors. Like I was some intern who hadn't worked out, not the person who'd coded our first algorithm on a laptop held together with duct tape. Security appeared at my elbow before I even stood up. Company protocol, they whispered, nothing personal. 200 people watched as I was escorted from the room like a criminal. Some were crying. Tom from development stood up like he was going to protest, but Marcus shot him a look that promised unemployment. I walked through the hallways I'd helped design, and past the offices I'd painted myself that first summer, while security guards treated me like a threat to the empire I'd built. They watched me pack my desk into a cardboard box. 12 years reduced to what I could carry in my arms. The photo from our wedding went in first, then the prototype sketches. I'd drawn the awards we'd won together. Jessica appeared in my doorway as I was removing my personal equations from the whiteboard. She wanted to ensure the transition would be smooth, she said. She'd need all my passwords, all my documentation, all my intellectual property that now belonged solely to the company. The security guards escorted me through the lobby I'd walked through thousands of times. Employees pressed against windows watching my walk of shame. The receptionist, who'd started the same week as me, was sobbing. The security guards took my badge, my parking pass, my company laptop. They even requested my business cards, like I might use them to stage a corporate coup. Then the glass doors closed behind me, and I stood on the sidewalk, holding a box of memories locked out of my life's work. Within hours, the tech press had the story. Former executive let go in a restructuring. Marcus had already crafted the narrative. Anonymous sources suggested I'd been struggling with the pressure that my mental health had affected my performance. My phone exploded with messages from colleagues, competitors, journalists. But the damage was done. In Silicon Valley, perception is reality, and Marcus had painted me as unstable. I drove home in a daze, expecting to find some explanation, some remorse, some acknowledgement of what had just happened. Instead, I found a letter from Marcus's lawyer on the kitchen counter. He was filing for a divorce and requesting I vacate the premises within 72 hours. The house we'd bought together, where we'd celebrated every milestone, was apparently solely his, according to agreements I'd signed without reading, trusting his love more than legal documents. My lawyer reviewed everything that night. The prenup I'd signed in love-blind faith gave me almost nothing. My reduced title at the company meant my equity was minimal compared to what it should have been. Marcus controlled 65% of voting shares. Fighting him in court would cost hundreds of thousands I didn't have, and years I couldn't spare. He'd won before I even knew we were playing. That night, I sat in a hotel room my entire life in 3 suitcases and a cardboard box. The minibar whiskey burned my throat as I scrolled through LinkedIn, watching my professional network distance themselves from me in real time. Unfollowed. Connection removed. Endorsement withdrawn. But in that darkness, that absolute bottom, something crystallized. Marcus might have taken everything visible, but he'd forgotten what I knew, what I'd seen, what I could prove. And Jessica had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the woman who'd built the very foundation she stood on. the first person I called wasn't a lawyer or a reporter. It was Sarah, our former CFO, who'd resigned abruptly 3 months before my termination. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in Redwood City, far from the tech corridor, where we might be recognized. Sarah looked different out of her corporate armor, wearing jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt, her usual perfect makeup replaced with tired eyes and bitten nails. She slid a USB drive across the table before I even asked my first question. On it were financial records she'd copied before leaving, documents that showed a pattern of irregularities she'd tried to report to Marcus. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, receiving monthly transfers labelled as consulting fees. Shell companies invoicing for services that existed only on paper. All of it traceable to Jessica's authorization codes. Sarah had tried to warn Marcus, but he'd accused her of jealousy of trying to undermine Jessica's success. The next day, Sarah found her access revoked and a severance package contingent on signing an NDA. Sarah introduced me to others who'd been silenced. Michael from legal, who'd questioned suspicious contract terms. Jennifer from HR, who'd raised concerns about Jessica's previous employment gaps. Kevin from accounting, who'd noticed patterns in the financial discrepancies. We met in secret, like some corporate underground resistance, sharing information, connecting dots, building a case that went beyond personal betrayal to criminal fraud. David, one of my original engineers, became my inside source. He was still at the company, playing the loyal employee while documenting everything. He installed monitoring software that tracked email communications, recorded meeting conversations, captured real-time evidence of ongoing fraud. Through David, I learned about Project Prometheus, a supposed acquisition target that was actually a vehicle for siphoning company funds into private accounts. The investigation led me to Lisa Wong, a forensic accountant who specialized in corporate fraud. She worked through the evidence with methodical precision, uncovering layers of deception that went back to Jessica's first month at the company. The $3 million I'd initially discovered was just the beginning. The real number was closer to $15 million, hidden through a complex web of transactions designed to look like legitimate business expenses. We discovered Jessica's history was fabricated like a Hollywood screenplay. Her MBA from Wharton was real, but she'd been expelled from her first job for ethical violations. Her time at McKinsey ended with a sealed settlement. Goldman Sachs had no record of her employment beyond a 3-month internship. She'd scrubbed her digital footprint, but paper trails don't disappear completely. We found court records, former colleagues willing to talk off the record, a pattern of destroyed companies and discarded executives. The private investigator I hired uncovered the most damaging evidence. Photos of Jessica meeting with representatives from our biggest competitor, a Chinese firm, that had been trying to acquire our technology for years. Documents showing she'd been feeding them proprietary information, preparing for a hostile takeover that would net her and Marcus tens of millions in under-the-table payments. The company we'd built to democratize financial technology was being packaged for sale to the highest bidder. 3 independent board members agreed to meet with me secretly. Richard, who'd been our first major investor, was horrified by what I showed him. Patricia, who'd joined the board for our commitment to ethical technology, felt personally betrayed. James, the longest-serving member, had suspected something was wrong but hadn't had proof. They couldn't act immediately without alerting Marcus, but they promised to be ready when the time came. I spent weeks preparing a presentation that would be undeniable, irrefutable, devastating. 50 slides, documenting every transaction, every lie, every crime. Email threads with highlighted inconsistencies. Audio recordings of Jessica discussing the illegal sale. Bank statements showing the money trail. Testimonies from former employees. A timeline that showed how systematically they'd planned my removal to clear the path for their scheme. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday. Marcus and Jessica thought they were presenting a new 5-year strategy. They had no idea I still held 20% of company shares, enough to demand attendance at any board meeting. They had no idea about the allies sitting among the board members. They had no idea that David had installed software, giving him remote access to every computer in the building. They thought they'd deleted me from the story. They were about to learn that some code can't be erased. The night before the meeting, I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room, practicing my presentation one final time. Every slide memorized, every transition smooth, every piece of evidence triple verified. I thought about the woman who'd sat in that Harvard library 12 years ago, falling in love with a vision and a man who sold it. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone forged by betrayal, but not broken by it. someone who understood that justice isn't given, it's taken. The morning of the board meeting, I arrived at the building an hour early. The same security guards who'd escorted me out 6 months ago didn't recognize me at first. I'd traded my usual casual tech attire for a sharp charcoal suit that meant business. My attorney had already notified the board secretary of my intention to attend as a significant shareholder. They couldn't legally refuse me entry, though I could see them making frantic phone calls as I signed in. The boardroom was on the 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. I'd helped choose this space, insisting on natural light and open views to inspire big thinking. Now it would witness the biggest revelation in our company's history. Board members arrived in clusters, some nodding at me with carefully neutral expressions, others avoiding eye contact entirely. Richard gave me the slightest smile. Patricia touched my shoulder as she passed. They were ready. Marcus entered with Jessica at exactly 10 o'clock, their power couple entrance choreographed for maximum impact. The blood drained from his face when he saw me sitting at the table, my laptop open, my materials arranged. Jessica recovered faster, her smile sharp as a blade. She suggested I might be confused about the meeting's purpose, that former employees weren't typically included in strategic sessions. Her voice dripped condescension, but I detected something else underneath. Fear. The board chairman Walter Brennan called the meeting to order. Marcus immediately objected to my presence, citing my terminated status and potential conflicts of interest. I responded by sliding a single document across the table, our company's bylaws highlighting the shareholder attendance clause. Walter, a 70-year-old veteran of Silicon Valley wars, reviewed it carefully. The bylaws were clear. I had every right to be there. Marcus tried to proceed with his planned presentation, but Patricia interrupted. As a board member, she moved to suspend the regular agenda to address urgent concerns about financial irregularities. James seconded the motion. The vote was close, but it passed. Marcus's supporters were outnumbered by those I'd convinced, and those who simply wanted to hear what I had to say. Walter gave me the floor with 30 minutes to present my case. I started with a simple statement. Our company was being systematically looted and prepared for illegal sale to foreign competitors. The room erupted. Marcus stood up shouting about defamation and threatening legal action. Jessica tried to leave, but Richard quietly mentioned that everyone should stay until the presentation concluded. Security guards appeared at the doors not to remove me this time, but to ensure no one left. The first slides showed the clean financial data, what the board had been seeing in their reports. Then I showed the real numbers, the hidden transactions, the diverted funds. $15 million missing traced through shell companies to offshore accounts. I showed the forged vendor contracts, the fake consulting agreements, the invoice padding that Jessica had authorized and Marcus had approved. Their signatures were on everything digital and verified. When I played the audio recording of Jessica discussing the company sale with our competitor's CEO, the room went completely silent. Her voice was clear, talking about Marcus's cooperation, the timeline for my removal, the price they'd accept for our intellectual property. She mentioned the personal payments they'd receive, the new positions waiting for them after the acquisition. She laughed about how easy it had been to convince Marcus that I was the obstacle to their success. Marcus tried to claim the recording was fake, manipulated, taken out of context. That's when David, sitting in his office 3 floors down, activated his remote access. The main screen in the boardroom suddenly displayed Marcus's computer desktop. We watched in real time as he tried to delete emails, move files, destroy evidence. Every keystroke was visible, every panicked attempt to cover his tracks projected for all to see. David then pulled up the emails Marcus thought he'd deleted, showing conversations with Jessica dating back months before my termination, planning every detail. Jessica finally spoke, trying to spin the narrative. These were strategic discussions taken out of context. The financial irregularities were advanced investment strategies I wouldn't understand. The meeting with competitors was actually counterintelligence. Her voice was smooth, professional, almost convincing. Then I showed the investigation into her past, the ethical violations at her first job, the sealed settlement from McKinsey, the fraudulent employment claims, the pattern of companies left in ruins. I presented testimony from 23 current employees who'd witnessed suspicious activities but were afraid to speak up, emails from clients questioning strange charges, messages from investors concerned about governance, a letter from the FBI indicating they'd opened a preliminary investigation based on whistleblower complaints. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, catastrophic for Marcus and Jessica's defense. Walter called for a recess, but Marcus made one last desperate play. He invoked his majority shareholder status, tried to dissolve the board meeting, threatened to fire anyone who continued listening to what he called my vindictive lies. That's when our lead investor, someone who'd been silent until now, spoke up. He revealed that based on the evidence presented, Marcus's shares could be subject to clawback provisions for criminal misconduct. The company's insurance would require immediate action to limit liability. The board reconvened without Marcus and Jessica, who were asked to wait in separate conference rooms. The vote was swift and unanimous. Marcus was terminated as CEO, effective immediately. Jessica was suspended pending investigation. The FBI would be given full cooperation. A forensic audit would begin within 24 hours. And in a move I hadn't expected, the board voted to appoint me as interim CEO to stabilize the company during the crisis. Security escorted Marcus from the building just as they'd escorted me 6 months earlier. But this time employees didn't hide. They lined the hallways, watching the man who'd built a reputation on integrity revealed as a fraud. Jessica tried to leave quietly through the parking garage, but law enforcement was already waiting. The FBI had been monitoring our presentation through Richard, who'd worn a wire. They had questions about the $15 million. I walked back into my old office, now Marcus's former office, to find 200 employees gathered in the atrium below. Someone started clapping, then another, then everyone. Not because they celebrated Marcus's downfall, but because truth had finally surfaced. Tom from development was crying. Sarah, who'd flown back from Seattle when she heard about the meeting, stood in the crowd with her fist raised. The company we'd built on dreams and code had survived its first real test of character. That night, I sat in the CEO chair I'd never wanted this way, looking at the city lights below. Marcus was somewhere out there, his world collapsed, his fortune frozen, his reputation destroyed. Jessica was in federal custody, and I was exactly where I'd never planned to be, but exactly where the company needed me. Sometimes justice doesn't come wrapped in satisfaction. Sometimes it arrives exhausted, complicated, and tasting of tears. The aftermath unfolded like a slow-motion explosion across the tech world. Every major outlet covered the story, each with their own angle. Some focused on the corporate fraud, others on the personal betrayal. The phrase boardroom coup appeared in 100 headlines, though I never saw it as a coup. It was restoration, reclamation, resurrection of what should have never been corrupted. 6 months into my role as CEO, Jessica's trial began. She looked smaller in the courtroom, her power suits replaced with conservative dresses meant to evoke sympathy. Her lawyer painted her as an ambitious woman who'd been manipulated by a powerful man. But the evidence was clear, her signature on every fraudulent document, her voice on every incriminating recording. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. 15 years in federal prison, though she'd probably serve 7 with good behavior. Marcus's fall was more complete. Beyond the criminal charges, he faced civil lawsuits from investors, employees who'd lost stock value, and partners who'd been defrauded. His personal assets were frozen, then liquidated to pay settlements. The house we'd shared was sold at auction. His car collection, his investment portfolio, his prized startup memorabilia, all gone to satisfy judgments. He tried to start over, launching a new venture, but no one would fund him. His name had become synonymous with betrayal in Silicon Valley, a cautionary tale told at business schools. The company transformation under my leadership surprised everyone, including me. I kept 150 of our original employees, the ones who'd stayed loyal despite the chaos. We implemented radical transparency with all financial data accessible to every employee. We created an employee ownership program that distributed equity based on contribution, not title. We established an ethics board with veto power over any decision that might compromise our values. Our revenue hit record numbers within the first year, not through financial manipulation or aggressive tactics, but through genuine innovation. The algorithm I'd been refining, the one Marcus had dismissed as too complex, became our flagship product. Banks lined up to license it. Governments requested our consulting. We went from a company valued at $50 million to one worth over $100 million, and this time the numbers were real, verified, sustainable. I instituted a mentorship program for women in tech, using our story as both warning and inspiration. Every month, I'd host dinners for female founders, sharing not just the victory, but the pain that preceded it. We talked about recognizing red flags, protecting intellectual property, maintaining self-worth when others try to diminish it. Some cried hearing my story. Others shared their own. All left with something more valuable than advice. They left with proof that survival was possible. Marcus reached out once 8 months after everything ended, a handwritten letter, not email, arriving at the office. He wrote about understanding now what he'd lost, not just the company or money, but trust, love, the future we'd planned. He apologized, though the words felt hollow on paper. He asked for forgiveness, though he knew it wasn't his to request. He ended by saying I'd been the best part of his life, and destroying that was his greatest failure. I kept the letter in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even people we love completely can choose betrayal over honor. The company culture evolved into something beautiful. Engineers felt empowered to innovate without fear. Sales teams shared commissions with support staff. Marketing collaborated with development instead of dictating to them. We had the lowest turnover rate in the industry because people felt valued, heard, essential. The company we'd dreamed about in that Harvard library finally existed, though the path to get here was nothing we could have imagined. I started dating again after a year, tentatively, carefully. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, and every dinner felt like a risk assessment. But there was a venture capitalist named Daniel who understood both ambition and integrity. He'd been through his own corporate betrayal, understood the scar tissue it leaves. We took it slow, keeping our professional and personal lives separate, building something based on mutual respect rather than shared dreams. It wasn't the passionate merger Marcus and I had been, but it was honest, stable, real. The investigation revealed more than we'd initially discovered. Jessica and Marcus had planned to sell not just our company, but our entire client database to competitors. They'd already transferred some proprietary code, though David had built in kill switches that made it worthless without our servers. The FBI found evidence of similar schemes Jessica had run at 2 other companies, though those CEOs had been too embarrassed to press charges. We became the case that stopped her, the story that exposed a pattern of corporate predation. 2 years after that boardroom confrontation, we went public again. This time, I rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange, surrounded by employees who'd weathered the storm with me. Our valuation exceeded $200 million. Marcus, according to colleagues who still tracked him, was working as a consultant for small startups, his reputation limiting him to companies desperate enough to overlook his past. Jessica remained in federal prison, her appeal denied. Standing here now, 3 years after that morning, when security escorted me from my own company, I can trace the path from humiliation to vindication. The boardroom where Marcus fired me is now where I sign partnerships with Fortune 500 companies. The office he locked me out of displays awards for ethical leadership and innovation excellence. The elevator that carried me down in shame now takes me up to a future I built from the ashes of betrayal. The journey from betrayal to triumph wasn't clean or easy. There were nights I sat in my hotel room wondering if fighting back was worth it. Days when the legal bills seemed insurmountable and the emotional toll felt crushing. Moments when I questioned whether justice was possible in a system designed to protect those already in power. But every small victory, every piece of evidence, uncovered every ally who stood beside me, proved that truth, while slow, ultimately surfaces. I learned that betrayal often comes dressed as love ambition, wrapped in affection, greed, disguised as partnership. The red flags I ignored weren't absent, they were just coloured by trust. Marcus choosing titles that diminished my contribution. Jessica arriving without consultation, late meetings that excluded me, financial decisions made in shadows. Each small erosion of respect prepared the ground for complete destruction. Now I teach others to recognize these patterns before they become catastrophes. The concept of success has completely transformed for me. It's not about valuations or market share or magazine covers anymore. Success is sleeping peacefully, knowing every dollar was earned honestly. It's employees feeling safe to speak truth to power. It's young women in tech seeing possibility instead of just obstacles. It's building something that can survive its founders because it's based on principles rather than personalities. That's the company we have now, the one that should have existed from the beginning. People ask if I forgive Marcus as if forgiveness is binary, complete, or absent. The truth is more complex. I forgive the young man in the Harvard library who genuinely believed we could change the world together. I forgive the husband who held me through grief and celebrated every small victory. But I cannot forgive the calculated cruelty of public humiliation, the systematic destruction of my reputation, the choice to value money over 12 years of partnership. Some betrayals create permanent alterations in our capacity for absolution. The greatest lesson from this experience isn't about vigilance or contracts or protecting yourself legally, though those things matter. It's about understanding that your worth isn't determined by those who try to diminish it. They can take your title, your office, your marriage, your reputation. But they cannot take your knowledge, your capabilities, your fundamental value. Those belong to you alone, and from them you can rebuild anything, everything better than before. When young founders come to me with stories of being pushed out, overlooked, betrayed by partners, I tell them this: the pain you're feeling is real and valid and deserves to be acknowledged. But it's also temporary, a transition rather than an ending. The same brilliance that built the first version can build the second stronger for having survived the storm. Your comeback story hasn't been written yet, and you hold the pen. Don't let anyone else author your ending. I think about Jessica sometimes sitting in her federal cell, all those ambitions reduced to a number and a release date. Her intelligence could have built something meaningful, but she chose destruction over creation. Marcus could have had everything he claimed to want, but greed made him stupid. They bet everything on my silence, my disappearance, my defeat. They lost that bet spectacularly, publicly, permanently. My office now has a new addition beside the framed napkins from Harvard. It's the security badge they took from me that morning, the one that marked my lowest moment. I had an employee fish it out of the trash, and now it sits in a place of honor. Not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of resilience. Every morning when I see it, I remember that the worst thing that happens to you can become the foundation for your greatest achievement. The company continues to grow, but sustainably, ethically, with purpose beyond profit. We've expanded internationally, but we've also expanded our impact. We fund coding schools in underserved communities. We provide free financial tools to small businesses. We've published our algorithms open source so others can build on our foundation. The democratization of financial technology that Marcus once preached but abandoned, we're actually achieving. The dream survived the dreamers who betrayed it. This story could end with me in that boardroom watching security escort Marcus out justice served and victory claimed. But real endings are messier, longer, more complex. Real endings involve rebuilding trust synapse by synapse. They involve learning to celebrate without looking over your shoulder. They involve becoming someone you're proud of, not in spite of what happened, but because you transformed it into something meaningful. The boardroom where I was destroyed became the boardroom where I was reborn. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be, and then becoming more. What betrayal have you transformed into triumph? When did someone underestimating you become the fuel for your greatest achievement? Share your story in the comments below, because every survival story helps someone else survive. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more about transforming corporate betrayal into personal victory. Share this with anyone who needs to remember their worth isn't determined by those who try to diminish it. Thank you for joining me on this journey from humiliation to triumph. Remember, your comeback story is waiting to be written, and you're the only one who can write it.